In sports, a mistake usually just costs you a win in a single game. A missed free throw, a drop pass, a strikeout. You hang your head, you go to the locker room, and you try again next game or next season. But in the summer of 1994, a single mistake during a World Cup match didn't just cost a team a tournament. It cost a man his life. This is Andrés Escobar. He was the captain of the Colombian national team. He was known as the gentleman of the pitch, a universally loved, fiercely honorable player. And in one devastating moment at the 1994 World Cup against the United States, he made the worst mistake a defender can make. He scored an own goal. 10 days later, Andrés Escobar would be shot dead in a parking lot in his hometown of Medellín, Colombia. How did a game of soccer become a literal matter of life and death? To understand the murder of Andrés Escobar, you have to understand the terrifying world he was forced to play in. A world where drug cartels owned teams and cities, where millions of dollars in dark money dictated who lived and died, and where two men sharing the same last name would come to represent two completely different sides of Colombia. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Colombia was tearing itself apart. The Medellín cartel, led by Pablo Escobar, was making billions of dollars smuggling cocaine around the world. But Pablo Escobar had a problem. He had more money than he could easily hide. He needed a way to launder millions of dollars quickly, and professional soccer became one of the perfect solutions. This era became known as narco soccer. Drug cartel bosses began buying Colombian soccer clubs. Pablo Escobar took control of Atlético Nacional, the pride of Medellín. Rival cartels purchased teams of their own in cities like Cali and Bogotá. The clubs became tools for money laundering, but they also benefited from enormous investment. Cartel money paid for facilities, scouting networks, salaries, and player development. Talented Colombian players were encouraged to stay home instead of leaving for Europe. The cartel bosses treated soccer like a playground. Rival drug lords wagered millions on matches. Professional players were flown by helicopter to private estates to participate in high-stakes games. Yet out of this dark and violent system emerged something remarkable. Colombia suddenly possessed one of the most talented national teams in the world. At the heart of that team stood Andrés Escobar. Despite sharing a last name with Pablo Escobar, the two men were not related. In many ways, Andrés represented everything Pablo did not. He was disciplined, humble, deeply religious, and respected by teammates and opponents alike. He became the anchor of Colombia's defense and one of the most admired players in the country. By 1993, Colombia was no longer simply a good soccer team. Many believed they were the best team on earth. That belief reached its peak in September of 1993 when Colombia traveled to Buenos Aires to face Argentina in a World Cup qualifier. Argentina had not lost a home qualifier in years. Colombia didn't just beat them, they humiliated them. The final score was 5-0. The Argentine crowd gave the Colombian players a standing ovation. Soccer legend Pelé publicly named Colombia as his favorite to win the 1994 World Cup. But while the national team was reaching historic heights, the country beneath it was descending into chaos. In December 1993, just 6 months before the World Cup, Pablo Escobar was killed by Colombian authorities. Many people assumed his death would make Colombia safer. Instead, it made the situation even worse. While Pablo was alive, there was at least a hierarchy within the criminal underworld. When he died, that structure collapsed. A power vacuum opened across Colombia. Armed gangs, rival cartels, and splinter organizations all began fighting for territory and influence. The old rules disappeared. Among the people filling that vacuum were wealthy criminals with enormous gambling interests. As the 1994 World Cup approached, illegal betting syndicates poured millions of dollars into wagers on Colombia to win the tournament. The pressure on the national team became unimaginable. The players were not simply representing their country. They knew powerful and dangerous men back home had bet fortunes on their success. Then the tournament began. Colombia entered the World Cup as one of the favorites, but immediately stumbled. In their opening match, they lost 3-1 to Romania. The defeat shocked the soccer world. Back in Colombia, betting syndicates lost enormous sums of money. Soon afterward, tragedy struck close to the team. The brother of defender Luis Fernando Herrera, known as Chonto Herrera, died in what was reported as a suspicious car crash. Then death threats began arriving at the team's hotel. Midfielder Gabriel Gomez received direct threats, warning that his family would be murdered if he played in the next match. the atmosphere became unbearable. Manager Francisco Maturana reportedly broke down emotionally as he addressed the squad. Fearing for Gomez's safety, he removed him from the starting lineup. The team entered its next match against the United States, exhausted, frightened, and emotionally shattered. On June 22, 1994, Colombia faced the host nation in a must-win game. A loss would almost certainly eliminate them from the tournament. In the 34th minute, American midfielder John Harkes sent a low cross into the penalty area. Andrés Escobar moved to intercept it. He did exactly what defenders are trained to do. He slid toward the ball and stretched out his leg, but instead of clearing it away, the ball deflected off his foot and rolled into his own net. An own goal, one of the most painful moments a defender can experience. Colombia eventually lost the match 2-1. The tournament favorites were eliminated before reaching the knockout stage. Millions of dollars in illegal bets vanished overnight. After the tournament, manager Francisco Maturana reportedly urged players to remain abroad for a while. He feared the anger waiting back home. But Andrés Escobar refused to hide. Shortly after returning to Colombia, he wrote a newspaper column urging calm and perspective. He reminded supporters that life continues after defeat. His message was simple. No matter how difficult things become, people must stand back up and move forward. On July 2, 1994, Andrés went out with friends in Medellín. He wanted to resume normal life. At a nightclub called El Indio, he encountered Pedro and Juan Galán, men linked to criminal organizations and the drug trade. The brothers began mocking him over the own goal. They applauded sarcastically and taunted him repeatedly. Eventually, Andrés and his friends decided to leave to avoid confrontation, but the situation followed him outside. In the parking lot, the Galán brothers and their associates confronted him again. Witnesses later reported that Andrés tried to explain that what happened on the field had simply been an accident, but reason no longer mattered. A bodyguard named Humberto Muñoz stepped forward. He pulled out a .38 caliber revolver. Then he fired 6 shots. According to witnesses, after each shot the gunman shouted, "Goal!" as if he were a soccer commentator celebrating a score. Andrés Escobar was rushed to a hospital. He died shortly afterward. He was 27 years old. More than 120,000 people attended his funeral. The murder shocked not only Colombia, but the entire world. For many Colombians, Andrés Escobar's death symbolized something larger than the loss of a soccer player. It represented the moment when violence, corruption, and cartel influence had consumed even the country's most beloved sport. The golden generation of Colombian soccer quickly unraveled. Several players distanced themselves from the national team. Fear replaced hope. Colombia would not qualify for another World Cup for 16 years. Humberto Muñoz was eventually convicted and sentenced to 43 years in prison. However, he was released after serving only 11 years. The Galán brothers faced limited consequences. Today, Andrés Escobar remains one of the most respected figures in Colombian sports history. His story continues to serve as a warning. Sports inspire passion, they create heroes and villains, they unite entire nations. But they are still games. Andrés Escobar understood that better than anyone. He believed that life does not end because of a mistake on a soccer field. The tragedy is that he was never given the chance to prove it. His legacy grew far beyond the statistics of his career. People remembered not just the player he was, but the person he chose to be. Teammates described him as humble, thoughtful, and remarkably calm under pressure. He carried himself with dignity even during the darkest moments of his life. Years after his death, his name is still spoken with respect across Colombia. Stadiums fall silent when his story is remembered. Young players learn about him long before they learn about many champions. Because Andrés Escobar's legacy was never about trophies. It was about character. It was about responding to failure with grace instead of anger. It was about understanding that a single mistake should never define an entire life. His own goal lasted a moment. The lessons from his life have lasted decades. And while the world remembers the tragedy of July 1994, many choose to remember something greater. A man who showed extraordinary humanity in a sport that sometimes forgets what humanity looks like. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the darkest stories in sports history, be sure to subscribe and let me know what story you'd like to see covered next.